Before corn ruled the Americas, empires rose from grains you've never heard of. Archaeologists found ancient storage pits in Cahokia filled with forgotten seeds 5,000 years old. Today, I'll show you 8 Native American crops that fed empires long before corn even existed, and how we lost them.
Number 8. Amaranth. In 1521, when Hernan Cortes marched into Tenochtitlan, he found more than gold. He found a grain that held a nation together. The Aztecs called it amaranth. It grew on mountains, rooftops, and temple gardens. It was food, fuel, and faith in one seed. Aztec farmers planted it across valleys that rarely saw rain. The plant thrived in poor soil, resisted drought, and produced brilliant red seeds that shimmered like rubies in the sun. Amaranth fed warriors, children, and emperors. It made up nearly 80% of their agricultural output during harvest season. More than 20 varieties grew across Central America, each one bred for altitude, flavor, or ritual. But what made it sacred also made it dangerous. During religious festivals, the Aztecs mixed ground amaranth with honey and human blood to form small idols of their gods. These were eaten after ceremonies as a symbol of life. When Spanish priests saw this, they saw heresy. The church called it devil's grain. By 1524, the Spanish banned its cultivation. Anyone caught growing amaranth faced punishment, flogging, forced labor, or death. They replaced it with wheat, a crop that demanded water and control. The empire buried an ancient superfood under centuries of fear. Fields that once produced millions of pounds a year fell silent, yet the seed refused extinction. It survived in mountain villages where farmers hid it among maize and beans. Mothers saved a handful each season, passing it through generations in clay jars. By the 1970s, botanists studying Andean crops rediscovered it. To their surprise, it contained twice the protein of rice and all 9 essential amino acids, something modern grains still lack. Now, nutritionists call amaranth a complete food. It reappears in protein bars, flour, and even NASA's space farming trials. A seed outlawed by the empire now feeds astronauts. But Amaranth's rebellion didn't happen alone. Across the forests and rivers of early America, another plant carried similar defiance, a root that saved settlers from starvation. How did one forgotten vine become the meal that kept the first colonists alive? Number 7. Groundnut. In 1623, winter hit the Plymouth colony harder than anyone expected. Their corn failed, their wheat dried up, and stored food ran out. People were starving. Then, native tribes along the rivers offered them something unexpected, a root they called upos, or groundnut. It wasn't a nut at all. It was a vine with underground beans that tasted like potatoes, rich and earthy, packed with protein. Tribes like the Wampanoag, Narragansett, and Abenaki had relied on groundnuts for thousands of years. They roasted them over fire, boiled them into stews, or ground them into flour for bread. The vines grew wild along creeks and swamps, twisting around trees and reaching deep into fertile mud. They didn't need tending. They found water themselves. When English settlers discovered them, they survived because of them. Pilgrims recorded eating groundnuts daily during famine. In 1623, Edward Winslow wrote, "We had rather have groundnuts than peas or parsnips." For years, they harvested them like treasure. But as European crops took over, the vine lost its place. Wheat and potatoes replaced it. By the 1800s, only rural tribes and a few curious botanists remembered its name. Scientists later found out why it mattered so much. Groundnuts contain 3 times the protein of potatoes and more iron than most vegetables. In the 1990s, researchers at Louisiana State University tried domesticating it for modern agriculture. The plant refused to behave. It grew slow, tangled, unpredictable, just like it did in the wild. For indigenous farmers, that defiance meant freedom. A plant that fed people without permission or control couldn't be owned. It grew where water flowed and governments didn't reach. But the next food on this list didn't grow underground. It floated on lakes, shimmering like silver. And the fight to control it turned into one of the most controversial battles in modern native history. Number 6. Wild rice. In the Great Lakes region, long before European ships touched the coast, a grain grew on water. It wasn't farmed. It was hunted. The Ojibwe called it manumin, the good berry. It floated on lake surfaces like soft green arrows, waving in the wind. Every fall, canoes glided through those beds, men knocking the grains into baskets while women paddled gently behind wild rice. Wasn't just food. It was law, ceremony, and identity. According to Ojibwe migration stories, their ancestors followed a prophecy that told them to move west until they found food that grows on water. When they reached Lake Superior, they saw it, endless fields of rice shimmering under the sun. By 900 AD, it had become the heart of their economy. A single acre could yield 700 pounds of rice, enough to feed a family for months. The grain was rich in protein, minerals, and fiber. It was stored for years without spoiling. For tribes of the Great Lakes, wild rice was life itself. Then, in the 20th century, things changed. Minnesota companies began developing hybrid paddy rice, a domesticated version grown in flooded fields. It spread fast and cheap, but it came with chemicals, machinery, and patents. By the 1980s, native rice fields were collapsing under pollution and encroachment. Some Ojibwe communities even sued the state to protect traditional harvesting rights. Still, the real grain survives, wild, stubborn, unpredictable. It grows only where it chooses. Scientists have tried cloning it for years, and it refuses. Every season, native harvesters return to the lakes, canoes sliding through the morning mist, gathering the same seed their ancestors once did. But while the Ojibwe defended their water harvest, far south other people were climbing mountains to farm the sky. How did they turn cold stone into fields of green that fed entire nations? Number 5. Quinoa. At 12,000 feet above sea level, where most crops die, the Andes gave birth to a survivor. Quinoa. The Inca called it Chisia Mama, the mother grain. Long before European grains reached the Americas, this tiny seed fed armies, built cities, and powered an empire that stretched 2,500 miles. By 1100 AD, quinoa was the lifeblood of Andean civilization. It thrived in freezing nights, scorching days, and salty soil where nothing else could grow. 1 acre produced enough to feed dozens of families. Inca farmers believed the first seed each year had to be planted by the emperor himself, using a golden spade during a sacred ceremony. Quinoa held more than nutrition. It held power. It provided complete protein, calcium, iron, and all essential amino acids. Modern scientists still call it one of the most balanced foods ever grown. The Inca stored it in mountain silos for years, creating an emergency supply system that rivaled modern logistics. When Spanish conquistadors arrived in 1532, they recognized its influence. Anything sacred to the Inca threatened colonial rule. The Spanish outlawed quinoa, destroyed its fields, and replaced it with wheat. Some farmers were executed for hiding seeds. Within a century, it vanished from trade routes. But the grain waited in silence. Centuries later, in the 1970s, scientists rediscovered wild quinoa growing near Lake Titicaca. Its resilience shocked them. It survived centuries of neglect without losing fertility. By the 2000s, quinoa exploded globally, sold in over 120 countries, turning poor Bolivian farmers into overnight exporters. Yet the surge caused internal conflict. Prices rose so high that locals could no longer afford their own ancestral food. Still, quinoa remains a symbol of survival, a rebel grain that outlasted empires and outlived colonization. But while the Andes guarded their golden grain, the forests below hid another powerhouse, a fruit that turned out to be older than chocolate and far more addictive. What secret did it hold that even modern chefs struggle to recreate? Number 4. Cassava before corn took over, one root fed millions. Cassava. Archaeologists found traces of it in coastal Ecuador dating back over 7,000 years. It grew where rain failed, where soil turned to dust, and where war tore fields apart. Tribes across South America treated it like insurance, a plant that never quit, even when everything else did. Cassava looked harmless, but it carried danger. Its raw form contained cyanide compounds that could kill if eaten carelessly. People learned to peel, soak, and ferment it, turning poison into life. That process became cultural wisdom passed from mothers to daughters. One mistake, and entire families could fall sick. Yet done right, it produced flour that lasted for months, even in humidity. The Tupi people of Brazil perfected it. They built large wooden presses called tipatis that squeezed the deadly juice from shredded roots. That juice wasn't wasted. It became tucupi, a yellow sauce still used today in Amazon cooking. Every step balanced risk and reward. By the time Europeans arrived in the 1500s, cassava had spread across the continent. It could yield 10 times more calories per acre than grains like wheat. Colonizers saw its potential and carried it to Africa and Asia, where it still feeds over 800 million people. But the irony is sharp. The world's African famine food began in the Americas. Today, cassava is in everything from tapioca pudding to biofuel. It survives drought, heat, even floods. Few plants have saved more lives or tested more courage. However, while cassava spread globally, another ancient crop vanished locally, replaced, erased, and later rediscovered in a single forgotten village in Arizona. What desert plant managed to grow without rivers and still feed a civilization for centuries? Number 3. Tepary beans. In the Sonoran Desert, where summer heat can melt tires and rain might vanish for months, one small bean kept entire tribes alive. The Tepary bean, or bavi as the Tohono O'odham call it, could grow with almost no water. Archaeologists have found Tepary seeds in Arizona cave dwellings dating back over 2,000 years. Proof that this bean mastered survival long before irrigation existed. It grew where even cactus struggled. Farmers planted it deep in sandy soil to chase hidden moisture. The plant stayed low, tough, and wiry, their roots drilling into the desert floor. While corn wilted, Tepary beans thrived, producing small white or tan seeds packed with protein, calcium, and iron. To the Tohono O'odham and Pima people, this crop meant freedom. They didn't need rivers or European farming tools. Their ancestors could grow food anywhere, even during droughts that starved neighboring settlements. Spanish explorers in the 1600s couldn't believe it. Reports from 1684 describe beans that grow in sand where water never reaches. Modern scientists later confirmed it. Tepary beans use 60% less water than common beans and mature in half the time. That efficiency made them a survival weapon during famines. By the early 1900s, they nearly disappeared, replaced by industrial crops. But in the 1970s, native farmers began replanting heirloom seeds hidden in jars and family gardens. Today, Tepary beans are returning, drought-resistant, climate-ready, and still holding their desert soul. NASA even listed them among potential crops for Mars research. But while the desert learned to grow life from dust, another civilization thousands of miles south learned to feed millions using frozen air. How did they build a food system so advanced that it rivaled modern refrigeration 1,000 years ago? Number 2. Chuno high in the Andes, nights drop below freezing, even when days hit 80 degrees. Around 800 years ago, the Inca used that brutal climate to pull off something scientists would only perfect in the 20th century: freeze-drying. The result was chuno, preserved potatoes that could last over 10 years without spoiling. It started every winter. Farmers spread small potatoes across the frosty ground overnight. By morning, they were frozen solid. Then came the work. People stomped on the potatoes barefoot, pressing out the water while the sun thawed them. After several freeze-thaw cycles, the spuds became hard, light, and ghostly white. Chuno was born. It might sound simple, but it changed everything. Inca soldiers carried bags of chuno while marching through mountain passes. Villages stored it in underground silos, feeding entire communities during droughts or sieges. When Spanish explorers reached Peru in the 1500s, they were stunned. One record from 1553 described it as potatoes turned to stone that still taste of life. Chuno's biggest secret was logistics. It allowed the Inca to build food security across vast distances, something medieval Europe couldn't match. It kept roads supplied, armies strong, and cities alive through harsh winters. The Inca treated it like currency, trading it for metals, cloth, and coca leaves across their 25,000-mile empire. Modern science later confirmed the brilliance behind it. Chuno's freeze-dry method preserves 90% of nutrients without electricity, packaging, or chemicals. A survival technology hidden in plain sight. But while the Andes were mastering the art of food preservation across the jungles of the Amazon, another civilization was creating something far stranger, a living soil that could grow food forever. How did they do it using only fire, clay, and bone over 2,000 years ago? Number 1. Terra Preta. In the middle of the Amazon, archaeologists once found something impossible. Buried beneath layers of jungle soil was a black earth so fertile it could grow crops year after year without losing strength. Scientists called it Terra Preta, meaning black earth. It covered thousands of square miles, land far too rich to occur naturally in that rainforest. Regular Amazon soil washes away after a few harvests. But Terra Preta stayed alive. It held nutrients for centuries, even after being abandoned. Radiocarbon dating traced some of it back 2,500 years, long before modern agriculture. The secret? Fire. Ancient Amazonians mixed charcoal, bones, pottery shards, and plant waste into the soil. That biochar locked carbon deep into the ground, trapping minerals and microbes. By 500 BCE, this method had created entire artificial ecosystems. People who once seemed like small nomadic tribes were actually early engineers, designing land that could feed dense populations. Some sites, like Marajó Island near Brazil's coast, show evidence of towns with over 100,000 residents thriving on Terra Preta-supported farms. European colonists arriving in the 1500s refused to believe this was human-made. They assumed the forest had created it by accident. For centuries, textbooks repeated that myth. Then, in the 1980s, satellite scans showed clear geometric patterns, massive agricultural grids hidden beneath the canopy. Today, scientists try to recreate Terra Preta to restore damaged farmland. Its carbon content is still 5 times higher than modern soil, yet the exact microbial recipe remains unsolved. It's humanity's oldest agricultural mystery, a soil smarter than us. But while the Amazon engineered living earth far to the north, a new wave of explorers was already preparing to erase these farming traditions who rewrote this history. And why do their stories still dominate classrooms today? Every lost crop hides a story about survival, science, and silence. Click the next video before it fades. Another forgotten food still holds the secret to how the world once fed itself.